in your experience of dealing with these cases, this sort of petri dish, fertile environment for abuse to be fostered, if you like, what do you see creating that in the institutions? Is it the setup of them themselves? Is it that individuals will find their way to these institutions because they know there's levels of protection and structure there? What do you tend to come across in your cases?
So, I mean, so there are a whole number of different things. I think obviously in residential institutions, children are particularly vulnerable because they are, they're isolated from, family support networks and so on. So there's that isolation. They're more vulnerable. For many years, it was very easy actually for sex offenders to get jobs in residential schools. I mean, it's astonishing when you look back just how easy it was. But we see, we've seen so many cases from the 70s, 80s, even going into the 90s and later, where a sex offender would work in one school, they would be discovered, the school would give them a reference, and they would move on to another institution. So that was almost, that was normalized for many, many years. I think also with fee-paying schools, you've got a particular pressures around reputational protection. You see that in lots of institutions, but fee-paying schools depend for their survival on their reputation. They need people, they need more parents to come and send their children there. And so where something bad happens within the institution, there is this tremendous pressure to kind of keep it hidden. And we saw I was very involved in the ICSA hearings. I represented a large group in ICSA, and many of whom had been in residential institutions, and you just saw that time and time again, that something would be discovered, some abuse that was going on within the institution, and the institutional mindset was to keep it concealed, cover it up. And that is just how these places operated for many, many years. And I suspect some of them still do, and we come on to this later, but until we have mandatory reporting, I think that that issue will remain.
Yeah, thank you very much. In our work with survivors as well, we hear the same things, is that people were passed on to other schools with references, very sadly, and also that when and if people did come forward, they were kind of separated out from the herd, made to feel like an outlier or an outsider in the process, or that perhaps their memory was wrong, perhaps they'd misread the situation. They're very much kind of gaslit and minimized.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of survivors that we speak to, that was one of the worst parts. Was there was the abuse, but then there was the what happened afterwards, the cover up, the not being listened to, the being made to feel like you're crazy or weird or whatever it was. And then of course that happened, that stays with people for decades, until
you had, I've seen so many situations where people who've suffered abuse have approached the institution, and the response they've got has kind of implied that they are the only person who's making the complaint, and in fact there are others. But the institution doesn't admit that. That happens time and time again. So that kind of gaslighting, yeah, absolutely. You see that so often.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And you did touch on it a little bit about the kind of, you mentioned the 60s, 70s, 80s into the 90s. Many institutions would say now, this is a thing of the past, and this doesn't happen anymore. What's your experience of that, as far as perhaps has there been a noticeable reduction, however it still exists? What's your view on that?
So first of all, I don't think we can be confident that children are safe in residential schools now. I said this in ICSA, until we have mandatory reporting, it is entirely lawful for a teacher to know that a child has been raped and to do nothing about it. That is the legal position. There may be, teaching codes of practice and so on that would say that an allegation or a concern has to be reported. But until we have mandatory reporting laid down in the law, it will still be possible for abuse to be lawfully be covered up. And so that is where we are in the UK at the moment, and that has got to change. So I don't think we can have confidence. It is true, if you look back over the past sort of 30, 40 years, the campaigning that survivors have done and the political pressure has probably improved safeguarding. In residential institutions, there is much more, for example, a much stronger vetting and barring process than there was 30 or 40 years ago. So that what we saw before, where a sex offender could move from one school to another, there will be less of that going on. I don't think it would be I wouldn't be confident to say that doesn't happen, because I'm sure it does, but there's less of it. So there's probably been improvements in that, but I do continue to see cases from more recent times, and I also think we've got to remember that it takes a long time for people to disclose abuse. So when people say, well, abuse isn't happening, we just actually we don't know, because it takes people a long time to disclose, and it may be that in 20 years time we're discovering that there's a lot more abuse going on than we thought there was. So I don't think we can be confident about any of these things. I think things have improved a bit, but I think getting mandatory reporting in is crucial. And as I say, at the moment, it remains the case in the UK, and it's completely ridiculous, but it remains the case that a teacher can know that a child has been raped and not report it, and that is just unbelievable and completely wrong.